Okay.
Progress. So, okay, the session's now being recorded, everybody. So anyway, I'd just like to start again. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. It's very nice to see you here. I'm just going to welcome a speaker today is Professor Paolo Biagi, who's one of the co-organizers of this 2022 series for the Indus group, which will be running, and the themes of the lecture today, these series are effectively starting. We're working in a broadly chronological way from the earliest phases of
we are trying.
and moving through various periods of history in the Indus region, Professor Biagi is going to be speaking to us on the topic of the Palaeolithic and Mesolithic settlements of Sindh. And he's been conducting research in southern Pakistan for over 30 years, looking at Paleolithic and Mesolithic sites in collaboration with scholars from Pakistan and working in various regions. And this lecture is going to be a broad overview of the topic and also of his work. So we have a slight technological issue in the sense that I'm going to be having to be driving the slides while Professor Biagi will speak, and he'll give me prompts to change. But so thank you, Paolo. I'll hand it over to you. Before I get too far though, I'll go to my screen and make sure everyone can see the slides correctly.
Okay, I can see the first one. Okay.
Yep, and we're going back and forth. All right, please advise me.
So we can start. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to Cameron for introducing me to. And you know, my talk today is about the Paleolithic and Mesolithic settlement of Sindh, which is not a very, very easy topic because for a simple reason we know very, very little about it. Anyway, we tried during the last 30 years to improve a little bit knowledge about this topic. So I choose to show you this picture to introduce the topic, because it's a very nice view of the Thar Desert, as it is very, very close to the Indus River. But this is a region where these are the western fringes of the Thar Desert, and this is one of the locations in Sindh from which we have very good evidence of Mesolithic settlement. So let's go to the next slide, and start having a look at the real Paleolithic stuff. So who worked in Sindh during the 70s? There were two people, you know very well one of them, that is Miss Solchin, and she worked in what she called Milestone 101, which is Ungar, this one. And the second one was Professor Abdul Rauf Khan, a very nice guy. He was a geographer working at Karachi University, and the two people, that is Miss Solchin and Rauf Khan, were in touch. They knew each other pretty well, and Miss Solchin knew the collection of Professor Khan pretty well. So what did Rauf Khan do in those years? He conducted a very interesting survey all around Karachi, and he also moved a little bit further to the northeast. And when the site of Ungar, his milestone 101, began to be destroyed, he collected an unbelievable amount of stones from everywhere, from the top of the hills, from the terraces, from the plain around it, and so on. And he moved all the stuff first into his house and then into his office. And these are some of the pieces he collected. You see, Ungar, this is what I wrote, Ungar here, Ungar there. These are bifacial tools. Where they come from exactly, I cannot tell you. He told me where he collected them, but I'm not so sure about the very, very precise location. I mean, I don't know if they were along one of the hills or the foothill or whatever. But anyway, you see they are very worn and very weathered and very patinated pieces of chert. Chert is very, very common along the terraces of the Ungar Hills. So we move to the next one. And the next one, next slide. Okay, yeah, that's Ungar. The next slide is about a site which is, I think, is very much more common to you. This is the Rory Hills. I think everybody knows about the Rory Hills because they were discovered by British officers already more than 100 years ago, when they lived in Rory and Saka to build the dam. And Mrs. Olchin found a number of sites of different ages along the hills, but that was 1985, we started to climb up the central part of the hills around the shrine of Shadi Shahid, and we found a lot of very interesting Bronze Age mines. So why this slide? Well, this slide is just to show you where the site is located. You know, it's very interesting geographical location between Saka and Rory, and the hills are terraces some 45 kilometers long and 15 wide. And they divide to very different environments. It is on the left, you have the Indus River and the alluvium, which is about 10, 15 meters thick. And then you move to the right, you have the sand dunes of the Thar Desert. They are stabilized dunes and they're not mobile dunes. So on top of these hills, not everywhere, but in many different areas, you have an unbelievable amount of natural chert, which has been exploited, starting from the early Paleolithic to Bronze Age times. And the chart is, you see in the slide, in the bottom corner right, you see the color. It is light brown, sometimes it is a little bit spotted, or sometimes striped and so on. Anyway, the quality of this stuff is excellent. It's very, very easy to chip, and you can produce whatever you want with this kind of flint, chert, or whatever you want to call it. Let's go to the next slide. And here on the Rory Hills, that was, I think, I don't know, in the 90s, very beginning of the 90s. Not me, or not my colleagues, but Professor Mukhtar Kazi was writing his PhD dissertation to be discussed in Islamabad. And one day in August is awful here. Anyway, he went up to this hill, which is called Ziyarat Pir Shaban, and he found an impressive early Paleolithic site with lots of hand axes. Not only this one you can see in the photographs, but you know, all the area is more or less like this. And the site is on the surface of the site. You can see a lot of hand axes, which are very, very different from the ones I showed you before from Ungar. You see the color is different, patination is different, the shape is different, and so on. And most of these pieces are not finished. They're not finished at all. You see the rough outs, this one, for instance, or the other one to the right. Again, it's more or less similar. And these area you can see in the two slides on the left show where we open a small trench to precisely, more or less precisely define where the material, where the archaeological finds were from. All around, all the brownish stuff is pieces of chert, and the white stuff is limestones. And these are my two colleagues, they're opening the trench, the only trench we opened. This site has been published in Britain, and what you can see is very, very interesting is the slide on the right bottom, because it shows you a piece of finished hand axe. And this is very interesting because we found this hand axe broken into two different pieces, because most probably the artisan who made this tool, the last shot was wrong, and he broke the piece and threw it away, one on the right and the other one on the left. Here's the only finished piece, but you see again how different it is comparing this artifact with the ones you saw from Unger. So maybe I have little idea of the chronology of this stuff because we don't have any parameter. Anyway, for sure, they are their chronology, their age is different from that of Unger. So altogether, these two are the only sites I know in Sindh from which we have evidence of early, or whatever you want to call it, early Paleolithic or hand access sites in the region. And one is located in Upper Sindh, very close to the Indus River, and the other one is the northernmost part of the Lower Sindh, that is very close to the ancient city, the ancient capital of Sindh, Hyderabad. 1 and 2. That is all. Let's move to the next one because I have quite a good number of slides to show you and maybe some interesting material also. What is one of the controversial points about the Paleolithic in Sindh and in Pakistan in general? As I told you before, we know very little about, very, very little. But anyway, there are some sites, they are numbered with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for which we have some Levalloisian artifacts. Karachi is just is this gray spot, very close to number 2. Okay. Unger is number 1, and then we move up to another site which is located over here, from which we have just one piece we found about 10 years ago. So again, Professor Han, during the surveys he did were not exactly archaeological surveys. He was a geologist, he was a geomorphologist, and he wrote quite an interesting book on the geomorphology and also archaeology of this area, which is not very well known, very unfortunately. It was published in Hyderabad on grassroots, okay? But anyway, he found these kind of pieces. 1, 2, 3 is the most typical ones for you are number 4, number 5, and also number 6, where very, very close to the university campus. In front of the university campus was a hill, completely destroyed now. And this hill is called Mamuri Hills, which has a very, very interesting location, which I will show you in one of the next slides. Then he moved to the right, he moved to the east, he went, he moved around all these areas, all the terraces. He went also to Balochistan. He crossed the river Hab and went up to the Miani Hall, and altogether he found an unbelievable amount of prehistoric sites, mainly surface sites, but also settlements which are not Paleolithic in this case. They are Copper Age and a few Bronze Age and so on. But anyway, his researches, his surveys, from my point of view, are the key researches on the basis of which you can build up an archaeology, prehistoric archaeology of this region. And in effect, I'm continuing to work in some of the areas he explored in the 70s for the first time. So these kind of pieces, now these are drawings, so you cannot have a very clear idea what the material is like. But anyways, they're white and patinated. The butt is faceted, so it is quite interesting Levallois material. Let's move to the next slide, and we go back to Unger. Because Unger, again, he found extremely interesting material. I just drew a few pieces of his unbelievably huge collection, because it was not so easy to work there in those days. You see on the right, a very typical Levallois cores. And on the left, you see the top picture is a very, very long and narrow hill, which has been very fortunate also for us, because this is the only hill from which we have a very nicely preserved material on top, because it is so narrow that this area has not been exploited, has not been quarried, has not been destroyed by quarrying, as all the area around Unga has been in the last 50 years. And to the left, so I moved around for many weeks all around here, everywhere, in fact. And in the end, some Middle Paleolithic stuff came out. For example, this is not very beautiful, but anyway, it is a Levallois point. The body is faceted, there are some blades, which is not so strange because from Unga we have blades and not only flakes, and the material is white and patinated in white, exactly like the material Professor Khan had found in some areas in the 70s, not everywhere, but it's very, very, delimited locations. Okay, let's move to the next one. And here you have an idea of what Professor Khan found in Unga. They are not only Levallois cores, but they are also blades, wide, but with the same kind of patination, white and so on. They are faceted flakes, the side scrapers, transversal scrapers, and one piece is extremely interesting, that is number 9, because it is a very typical Mousterian point. So who built this stuff? Somebody says they were the first modern humans who came here, then went to India. And but one of the main points which I think have to be treated very carefully regards the southeasternmost spread of the Neanderthals, of which we know very, very, very little. Anyway, all this stuff is quite homogeneous, and there is a lot still to be studied in the geography department of Karachi University. Let's go to the next one. And another point of major interest is the late Paleolithic. You all know very, very well that the late Paleolithic is one of the main problems of the prehistory of India, as is the Mesolithic. Yes, Mesolithic for many Indians means just microliths, and that is. But the situation is a little bit more complicated than that. During, also that the first upper Paleolithic stuff was found not so many years ago. Also in Pakistan, that is in the terraces which face the Indus Valley, we have some upper Paleolithic material. These are some of the sites. In fact, nowadays we have 2 or 3 more. But anyway, you see again that number 2 and number 3 are located very close to Karachi. And then you move to number 1. Number 1 is extremely interesting, and I will show you some slides of this new location, which we found about 10 years ago. And then number 4 is Unga, and number 6 is a famous fort, is Ranikot, a little bit further to the north. And then again, number 5 is one of the many locations of the Rory Hills. The Rory Hills were discovered, also from an upper Paleolithic point of view by Mrs. Olchin. She wrote quite a few about these sites. Okay, here we have a list of the sites. There's one missing, or anyway, it doesn't matter because we found it just a couple of months ago. And what are the characteristics of these finds? There are some specific artifacts here in the southern part of Sindh, not in the northern one, which are very, very unique. We have the same characteristics also in India in some areas. And Professor Han was the first to describe some of these tools, some of these curved, points, which he called knives with a curved, side. Okay, let's go to what else can I tell you? Yes, if we go back to the other one before. Okay, I think you have the first quite clear view of the complexity of the landscape, because here's the Indus River basin. Okay, it flows, it flew, in very many directions. Here you have this incision right of the Rory Hills, very, very vertical. That is the Sarasvati, which is parallel to the Indus. Part of what it was, the Sarasvati, now is called the Nara Canal. But if you move further to the west, you see that all the part of the picture is white. And these are limestone terraces. And on top of the limestone terraces, which nobody ever investigated, I walked for hundreds of kilometers everywhere. There's a lot of stuff everywhere, not only archaeological material, but also, you can also find very good raw material sources. Okay, so, and if you move further to the west again, you see that there is a ridge that is a kirtan. These are the Kirtan Mountains, and a river, and they divide Sindh from Balochistan. And the situation in Balochistan is very, very different from the one we have in Sindh. We know almost nothing about this part of Balochistan. That is the main point. Okay, let's go to the next picture. And here, this location is now I think all this area has been destroyed. I went there with Professor Han in the very beginning of the 90s. No, that was about 12 years ago, so 22, 23 years ago. And this is one of the sites he discovered with final Paleolithic, late Paleolithic, whatever it was. He told me that he thought there was a stratigraphy here. And the location is very, very close to Karachi, along very, very close also to the coastline. The site is called Rory. It is a village, but now there's been an explosion in construction, whatever, all destroyed. And what he found here at Rory is a very interesting collection, a small collection of artifacts, like the ones you see in the upper picture to the right. There are all these artifacts are very, very similar to each other. They have a retouch, abrupt retouch along one of the edges. They are all curved, and these are the artifacts which he thought, he believed they were typical for a certain period. He couldn't define which one of the Upper Paleolithic. And you see also that all these artifacts are patinated. Other tools which he considered very important for the Upper Paleolithic were burins. It is true, we found some burins just in December associated with this kind of curved points, very, very close to Karachi. And the burins are systematically made this way. There are lateral burins, simple burins without retouch and anything. And to the left, you see some more artifacts which come from another location, which are for sure Upper Paleolithic, maybe a little bit more recent, and they look very much to the European stuff, for example, this point or this Vector point, and microburins 1, 2, and 3. Okay, let's go to the next one, and just to show you for the first time what we found in December here at the confluence of two rivers. One is the Mole, and the second one is the Karachi. These two rivers are extremely important because they join exactly here and they give shape to the Malir River. And the Malir is one of the two rivers which go down into the ocean in Karachi. One is the Malir, and the second one is the Liari or Layari. In the Layari River, a British officer found for the first time Mesolithic stuff. That was very many years ago. And along the Malir, Professor Khan found some Paleolithic and also Mesolithic material. So in the map, I put something else. I put the location of the Mamuri Hills. What are the Mamuri Hills? Mamuri Hills are the most unbelievable concentration of Mesolithic sites in the Indian subcontinent. They are located just in front of the Karachi University campus, which is this green spot over here. You cross the road, you get into the Mamuri Hills. All the area has been destroyed. When was it? About 15 years ago. But he spent, Professor Hahnemann, spent years collecting material from the Mamuri Hills, and he found some incredible material belonging to the Upper Paleolithic and also to the Mesolithic period. So what we surveyed in December, we surveyed the small, square over here as a confluence between the Mole and the Karachi, and we found some Upper Paleolithic sites in situ. Okay, I mean homogeneous sites without any more recent stuff or older stuff, whatever. And you see what the artifacts look like. There are points, these curved points, number 2, for example, and number 3, and there are, and we found also cores, number 1, number 4, and a few others. But what is interesting is the kind of patination, which is very typical, is Karachi number 5, but also the material they used for lapping artifacts. They collected small nodules, and we don't know the location of the sources that they exploited. We have a few signs of these suggested age of these later Upper Paleolithic stuff, and all the stuff, all the material of this period is exactly like that. The same kind of material. See, the cortex is very smooth. It didn't roll into a river, into a watercourse, and these nodules have been extracted from, I think, from a limestone deposit, or maybe they've been taken out of a conglomerate. So this is Karachi, fine. But if you have a look at the second picture on the left, you see another location, which is again inside the Karachi Gorge. And this is a very interesting site because we found some material on top. That was 2014. We also found a marine shell. Marine shells are not so uncommon in this region, very small pieces worn. We dated it and we had a very interesting pre-boreal radiocarbon date. But this is not the only interesting thing. The second one is that it had a delta 13C, which indicates very, very clearly that the shell had been collected from a mangrove swamp and not from the sea. So if you look again at this region, you see how complicated it is. So many rivers flowing from the northeast and from the north down into the Korangi Creek, that is Karachi, and then the Liari River, the Mamuri Hills, and the desert landscapes and the green landscapes where the rivers flow. and so on. So here, Professor Khan found hundreds of sites, okay? And his collections are very, very interesting and really huge. I drew more than 2,500 pieces of flint, only tools, artifacts, when I worked in Karachi years ago. Reri is located, you see the Korangi Creek. Okay, Reri is just over there facing the creek. Okay, let's move to the next one to show you again and again, and again, the Rory Hills. The Indus Valley, okay, the river, the Rory Hills are over here. Here's the Tar Desert, the Nara Canal. And what we have in the Rory Hills, which is unbelievable, is really incredible. We have kilometers of workshops with which are very, very which are characterized by the presence of subconical cores from which bladelets have been detached. They are not everywhere, but anyway, more or less where you see, I put the R over here for kilometers along the western edge of the limestone hills. We have this kind of phenomenon. And we excavated two of these workshops, and not completely. We just opened a trench of maybe 10 square meters. We collected all the stuff, and we found what kind of artifacts we could find from just to see also the differences between the early Paleolithic material and this one. Then not also from the point of view of the patination and from the point of view of the coloring and so on. They're not at all identical. They're quite different. We wrote, Mark Ramask and I already 40 years ago, we wrote a short paper on word archaeology describing the different patinations and the aspect of this material of different ages, early Paleolithic, late Paleolithic, or Upper Paleolithic, whatever you want to call it, and Bronze Age. So this workshop is again at Ziarat Pir Shaban, a little bit further south of the early Paleolithic concentration of sites, and it is called Ziarat Pir Shaban number 4. We excavated two, number 4 and number 2. They're not identical, but they're very, very similar to each other. Let's go to the next one, okay, to show you, to give you an idea what the Rory Hills are like. Okay, they are flat, they are mesas, they are terraces, but they are inclined. They're inclined toward the east. They're inclined toward the Nara Canal. And these are the western fringes, very close to the Bronze Age site, very famous Bronze Age site of Kotdiji, As Professor Khazi, you see there's no vegetation at all, just a few trees, acacia, whatever they are, along the small stream riverbeds. Sometimes it rains. It happened to me once, in August, there was some rain on the hills. And again, in the caption, it explained what kind of chert we have from the Rory Hills. Next one. So we can have a look at the site of Ziarat Pir Shaban number 4. And the trench we opened, and the artifacts we mapped, we located. Not, of course, not all of them, but some specific pieces, among which are the cores. You see those subconical and quite short with very clear bladelet detachments. We found also some picks, and in the Rory Hills and also Ungar, we have picks only and exclusively from the Upper Palaeolithic sites, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, are quite similar to each other. You have an idea of the dimensions of these tools. Become 3 centimeters. And okay, there's another point which is very interesting. These are sand spots. They most probably opened, not appeared to make, removed some stuff, and then the sand accumulated, the sand blowing from the Tar Desert accumulated inside it, and all around it, not all around it, but around part of it, you have the concentration of artifacts. Not everywhere. There's a major concentration over here in the squares from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, to BC. Okay, on the southwestern part of the workshop, and this is very, 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 very typical. The other side which we excavated was exactly the same, but this was much bigger than the other one. So we made some experiments to try to excavate a small one and then a big one. So let's go to the next one to show you what the situation is like at Unga, milestone 101. So Mrs. Olchin visited only the easternmost part of the hills, very, very close to the national road. Okay. We walked for many days all over the hills, and you see that the hills have been almost 90%, maybe today, 100% destroyed by quarrying. But there's just one in the southern part between Unga to the right and Afro to the west, one narrow hill which is still perfectly intact. And there are sites of, church sites of any age. The quality of the raw material is very, very good, it's excellent. And it is still quarried for industrial purposes. The Karachi people have decided to decorate the external walls of their houses with pieces of chert, and that's why some people collect not only limestone but also chert from the hills. Okay, let's move. You have an idea of the landscape, which is what interests me mainly. Professor Khan and also Mrs. Olchin worked mainly on around Onga, on top of it, and along the fringes of the hill. Let's go to. We move to the other one because I want to. Okay, these are some material which come from Unga. They're very typical for the Upper Palaeolithic, but you can see also how different this material is from the one which we have in Karachi. So all these things are still to be explained. For example, from Unga and from the Rory Hills, we don't have real retouched tools. I have never seen one in my life, but we have very, very beautiful blade cores, and subconical number 6 is one which I also photographed on the left, and the peaks number 8 and number 9. These are considered to be very, very typical for the Upper Paleolithic of this region. Let's go to the next one and see what another site which we discovered in 2013 is like. Ranikot. Ranikot is one of the biggest fortresses of the world. Maybe it was built by the Talpus, but nobody knows. Or the Abbasi, nobody knows, because the radiocarbon date we did falls in between the first and the second family, so it's difficult to understand who exactly built it, most probably the Abbasi. But anyway, here is the people who live here are Baluchis, they are not Sindhis. We are very, very close to Baluchistan. And on top of this mesa, it's flat, There's a Baloch camp and also a classical Upper Palaeolithic site, which yielded material comparable to that we found around Karachi. Next one. And the stuff is very, very patinated. The bladelet cores, subconical and other types, and also some curved points, very, very similar to the ones which not we, but Professor Hunt first, and then we also found around Karachi. Okay, let's move to the next one and have a look at two of the most important sites in Sindh. One is the Mamuri Hills. The Mamuri Hills, I told you, are located just in front of Karachi University campus. Why are they important? You see the number of sites which, on top of which Professor Han found material. There are more than 12 sites. A couple of them yielded Middle Paleolithic material, some others late Paleolithic, and number 12 is not reported. The number over here is an incredible Mesolithic sites which with any kind of geometric and microbuildings and so on. So the material which he considered belonged to the late Paleolithic has been published in a couple of papers. But here you see on the left and also on the right some of the most typical tools. There are burins. There's just one end scraper over here. There are curved points, number 18, number 11, and so on. And also here on the left bottom part of the picture, the typical curved points. These two sites are well located on top of the hills, but they're not the same. One is number 16, and the other one, I don't remember which one it is. Anyway, you see some material attributable to the late Paleolithic or Upper Paleolithic, whatever you want to call it, does exist also here in Lower Sindh. And these the Mamuri Hills are very interesting because there's a fault which crosses the hills from west to east, and there are very many springs. And all these springs originated small streams which go down into the Malaya River and within a few kilometers into the Ghazi Creek, which is in effect a mangrove swamp, the mangrove swamp of Karachi city. Let's move to the next one because I think also the next one is very interesting for you. Jampi. Where's Jampi? Jampi is not so far from Unga. Is maybe 20, 30 kilometers to the southwest. And we went to Jampi because reading the reports by Blanford, who was an incredibly clever geologist who wrote his Geology of Western Sindh in 1880, he describes the presence of a chert close to Jampi railway station. And it is true. There are some nodules of chert very, very close to the railway station. But if you move further to the south, where I think he didn't go, there are extremely good chert sources. And one of the best ones is this one, where I put flint outcrop. And all around it, there are Paleolithic sites everywhere. Kinja Lake is artificial. Kinja Lake is due to a new dam which was built maybe 20, 30 years ago, no, more than 20 years ago, I think 30 years ago, which conjoined two small basins. Now this Karachi freshwater reservoir is the Kinja Lake. And here is a spring. And the spring is also very famous because Hindu families group together in certain well-defined period of the year and for them this is a sacred place. So around between the church source and the spring, we have lots of sites, small sites, but very, very typical for the very, very end of the Paleolithic, or maybe the very beginning of the Mesolithic. I'll show you in the next slide why. Okay, in some of the next slides, what the situation is like. Okay, first, the chert outcrop is very clear, is very visible. When you have a hill, narrow and oriented east-west, that is a chert outcrop, because it is a formation which is totally different from the limestone terraces all around. It's Chambi 21. On top of it, there's a huge, there are flint chert mines. Most probably it was exploited also during the Chalcolithic period, and this is what the view you have nowadays from on the top of the chert outcrop towards the Kinja Lake. The view is very beautiful nowadays, but it was not like this some 20 or 30 years ago. And what is the material like? What are the finds like from this place? Next one, please. You see beautiful bladelet cores. You find them on top of the terraces on the surface. And, the scars, you see, they're quite different. They are more parallel and better, organized than the ones we've seen before. The next one again. And some of the tools are extremely interesting. There's another, on the left, there's another core, fine. There is a crested blade, but if you move to the right and have a look at the very, very last artifact on the right, which is exactly the same one we have in the horizontal position down below, there is a lunate. It is not the only one we found. We found a couple more, and one of them has impact traces. That means that these artifact that is lunate has been used, and it's been used most probably for hunting, and then it's been taken back to the original camp where people lived, something like that, maybe. So it is quite wide, and the bladelet from which it's been retouched has a trapezoidal cross section. So lunates would be very, very important also in the next few slides. We move a little bit more, okay? So again, Jampi is about 3 or 4 kilometers walking along the terraces, facing east and facing south. Sometimes you find a small concentration of artifacts, and again, not the nodules, but the cores are very, very nicely conceived. They removed very, very precisely narrow bladelets to make their tools. And I'm very sure that walking all over the terraces for days and days and days, you can find whatever you want. Next one again. And we go to another environment which is again very, very close to the Rory Hills. If you remember the first slide I showed you, okay, that one was taken for a fokker, flying from Saka to Karachi years ago. And these are locations, these are the salt lakes. They are salt lakes now. They were not during the Mesolithic. These are the salt basins from which we have quite a huge number of Mesolithic and microlithic geometric sites. The white is salt, and it's very, very visible within some of the basins, and the brownish, light brownish stuff is sand. These are stabilized dunes, invegetated of the Thar Desert. And this again on the right you see what you can recognize some of the basins that are exactly the same. For example, Kat Sim is the one you see in the center of the picture on the left, very close to the city of Tari. This is a caravan town, and east of it is located, starts to open the Thar Desert, and the Indus is further to the west. Okay, so what, next one, please. What we have from the dunes, but not, we have a lot of Mesolithic sites. There's a lot of material. At some very precise point. Where are the sites located? The sites are not located very close to the basins. They are located on top of the sand dunes and areas which are very nicely sheltered. So if you go down to the shores of the lakes, usually you do not find anything at all. But if you move up and you have a location which is more or less flat, vegetated, and a little bit vegetated, and the surface is characterized by a very, very thin level limestone that is kankar in Hindi, I think. Okay, here you have a lot of artifacts, and the artifacts are very, very clearly visible in the picture on the right. So it is, they look silver, small silver spots. Okay, all these are Mesolithic chert artifacts, and the materials exploited is it comes from the Rory Hills, further to the north. Exactly where in the Rory Hills I've not been capable to understand, because I never went back to that place anymore. So next one again, just to show you a couple more of these basins, and you see the salt, the white stuff all along the shore, okay, is simply salt, and the sites are on top of the dunes, and I think that the dunes are stabilized since the very end of the Upper Palaeolithic, that is, since the very end of the Pleistocene. Next one. Yes, again, this, this again, this is the first site we found so many years ago. And here you have an idea what the microliths are like. There are lots of trapezoidal geometrics. There is isosceles in most cases, have been obtained with the microburing technique, and cores, and I don't remember any end scraper, but anyway, there are some points, some notched blades, a few triangles, but the trapeces are quite common. Okay, next one again. Because these are just the last two or three, because what I wanted to show you is the difference, the clear difference we have between the material from the Mamuri Hills collected by Professor Khan from some of the sites, for example, these material collected from Mamuri Hills number 12, and the geometrics from the Thar Desert. You look at the trapeces, and these are unbelievable. Some of them very, very pointed. They look like the Cochinense stuff you find in Spain. And we don't have this kind of finds anywhere else in Pakistan, as far as I know. I haven't seen any in India. Maybe there are some, but I do not know them. And then the microburing technique has been employed quite a lot for making this kind of tools. And what is also very interesting is the quantity of notched blades we have from site 12. Okay, so we can say that some of the most interesting and most typical tools of Mamuri Hills number 12 are strange trapeces and denticulated blades, even though there are also quite a few, lunates of different size and made with different techniques. So it is extremely interesting and great variability of artifacts here in the Mamuri Hills. Unfortunately, we have a few data and we have to study them only from typological point of view. Next one, which is also the last one because it is already 2 o'clock here in my country. And I put these two photographs together to show you the difference between the Mamuri Hills material on the left, at least the colors, but also the technology which has been employed for making artifacts, and on the right, some of the trapeces found in the desert site. You see, there's a great difference. For example, for you, maybe it is not so relevant, but for example, number 22 is okay. It is what it is. It doesn't matter. It's a building sport, but anyway, it's not important. But it is very interesting because this material which comes from Gadani, that it comes from a small outcrop which were exploited in prehistory, which is located in Las Beras, very, very close to on the sea, because Gadani is a cape. So this is one of the very interesting points. You see the variety, incredible variety of microunits from number 23 to number 33. And on the right, the tar desert stuff is in contrast composed almost exclusively from by trapeces with just a few triangles, number 27, for example. So, okay, they're very, very different from each other from every point of view, manufacture, type of blanks which have been used, technology, and so on. Okay, this is the very last one. So, the general impression is that some of the sites of the Mamuri Hills, number 12, for example, can be attributed to the Atlantic period because of the presence of trapeces. The impression is also that we can, working on the few data we have, we can start distinguishing between the material which belongs to the very beginning of the Holocene to the material which belongs to the beginning of the Atlantic period, because also in this country, like almost everywhere in Europe, something changed very drastically around the beginning of the Atlantic. But these are things which need very, very many more data, and it would be beautiful to find some site in situ. I'm sure there are some somewhere. So let's move to the next one. And the next one is not, is the last one, is not very archaeological. And is a tribal chief who worked with us on the Rory Hills so many years ago and who helped us to transport, unbelievable quantities of chert down to Jaipur University campus. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, because I understand that the situation is a little bit complicated.
Thank you, Paolo. I have to apologize that several people have joined us quite recently. I know that there was an incorrect time put in the email that was originally sent out by me, and I did send it.
Yeah.
But I think some people didn't receive the correction, so that they've been joining.
Yes, there are 12 now.
Yeah. So I just should say that this lecture has been recorded. So
okay.
There will be, and it will be made available via the ARWA, the ARWA YouTube interface. So there will be an opportunity for those who've not managed to hear the lecture to join, to listen to it independently. But I mean, thank you so much for that. That was a sort of a gigantic, gigantic assessment of.
Yeah, because you can.
Yeah, you just, I mean, a long period of research, sort of 30 years plus your own work, plus work that was done earlier, and integrating it together with the work of the Altons and Professor Khan.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that there will be some questions, and I also, I would like to ask a question at the start. I'm curious about the degree to which there are any caves that have been preserved in the Kirtar Hills, or that is there just no cave settlements, cave sites?
I know from one of the former Director General, who is still in Islamabad now, who showed me the pictures and whatever of caves located very close to his village. The problem is that these locations are very, very close to Afghanistan, right. And the people who live there are 50% Pashtun and 50% Baloch. So there are sites, and there are also a couple of publications, 3 or 4 pages or whatever, concerning these sites, which were discovered roughly about 30 years ago. But many of these sites are very, very difficult to assess. They were very, very difficult years ago. Maybe now. But in Balochistan, you cannot go. You can't go to Balochistan for any reason if you're white. That is the main point.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand. Okay, no, thank you. Would anybody else like to ask any questions? I mean, if you would like to just raise your hand using the reactions button at the bottom of the screen, or you can type a question into the chat.
Okay.
Yep, Adam Green. Hi, Adam. Would you like to? You can turn your camera on or just speak, whichever works best.
Sorry, my network's a little flaky, so I'm going to keep the camera off. But thanks so much for the lecture, Paolo. It was quite amazing.
Thanks to you for coming.
All that material lined up, and I actually learned a lot. There's a lot of things I hadn't seen and hadn't thought about. But one of the things that jumped out at me, particularly when you were going through the Upper Paleolithic assemblages, or I think it was the one at KDJ1. I noticed a lot of I noticed a lot of hinge fractures in the assemblage, and so I was wondering if you wanted to comment on sort of compare and contrast some of the factors you see forming the assemblages. Like, do you think there was like a lower level of skill, or like was someone learning at KDJ1? Like, what do you think explains some of those patterns I saw?
So KDJ1 is not the most beautiful site in the world. It is just a terrace, which we found by chance. We collected, I think, 50 artifacts. None of them is characteristic. It's very typical. But because one of the things I do is dating whatever kind of marine or mangrove shell I found everywhere. And that was very interesting, because the date which came out is 8,257 or whatever, and plus minus is also very good. But the interesting thing is that the delta 13C was minus 4.44, which means that is not a marine. The shell doesn't come from a marine environment, from a mangrove swamp, because when you have a negative, you are surely 100%. I have more than 100 dates, radiocarbon dates from the last Bela and Sindh sites. So 100% sure of that, because when you have a marine delta 13, it is always positive. Because that is the real great importance of KDJ1. But anyway, talking about the Mesolithic, maybe this might be of some interest to you. The site which we found in December, on the 8th of December, it is very, very small. It maybe 10 square meters, and that is classic, beautiful, just with lunates. So what we are starting to understand, starting to find, to interpret the difference between the late Upper Paleolithic, from which you have curved points which are bigger sized, with some kinds of cores which are sometimes with opposite detachments, and the sites which have just lunates. So if we find Karachi is difficult because Karachi now is a military area, but from other sites like Gangeji or Mol or Mali and so on, if we find 5, 6, 10, whatever you want, spots with very, very well-defined material, each one by one, you can start establishing an unprecise chronology, but you can start understanding what is the difference between what is older and what is more recent. Is that what you want?
Yeah, no, that was quite interesting. Thank you.
So, Paolo, I remember you quite recently found something also in Banu district.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Would you like to make a comment on that?
Oh, that is, that was not so easy. I went there because I have a student, she's studying for a PhD, and she's from Banu.
Right.
By chance, I wanted to go to the Red Desert, and then they told me there's no Red Desert anywhere. Maybe they call this place, any place, Red Desert, because when they want to kill somebody, they throw it away in a place we call Red Desert. And at a certain point, one guy came out and said, "But this is a red desert." Okay, and that was very interesting. And there is a mound. There's a low hill, and all around it there is material, and this material is in a very fragmentary state, and there are lunates which are extremely small. We did a collection for maybe half an hour, with the military, with the soldiers. But what is very interesting is that I never published it, but anyway, I will do it one day. Around it, if you walk around on top of the sand deposits, there is material, not everywhere, but I'm sure that you can find sites of different ages. What age I can't tell you because I have very little idea. And a similar situation exists also in the Punjab, because I published a site from the Thal Desert, Thal, you know that, which is I'm not 100% sure it is Mesolithic. There must be others. It depends on the kind of research you carry out, because Mesolithic sites in most cases are very, very small. Not all of them, of course, but in some cases, in many cases, they are just a few square meters. But they're well defined, I don't think that everything is so mixed up. You have all these different, typologically differentiated material together. I'm pretty sure it is not like this. This is my sensation.
Right, okay.
Professor Han, who was quite clever, I went around with him for different times. He always distinguished the sites which were on top, which he found on top of the sand, and the ones which he found below the sands. And he was the only one who did this kind of observations. Nobody else did it.
Right. Yeah, no, I remember these sorts of issues. I think they were really. There was that challenge. I know that there's some Mesolithic sites that were identified in Banu region, and it was always a little bit of a challenge to know exactly where to situate them. But they also seem to be a little bit like the lakes that you described in in the tar area, these Mesolithic occupations close.
Yeah, well, the point is, if you start understanding the location, when you find one, you find others.
Right.
It's very repetitive because it is always the same thing, it's always identical, more or less identical.
Yes. Yeah. No.
And you need the raw material not so far away, not within 1 day's walk, I think.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And water.
That's always been an issue. I think some areas definitely. I mean, the Rory Hills, the raw materials are so good in terms of quality.
Yeah, sure, yes. But not only on the Rory Hills you have very good materials in Ongar, also in Jampier. And I'm sure if you go up to the Ranikot fort,
right.
it is identical. So there's a lot of very good raw material because some of the terraces are rich in chert, some others are not.
Right.
But the stuff is always very translucent and vitreous. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it is very, very, very good for napping.
Excellent. Okay. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask at this point? I realize we're sort of well past well into the second hour, I think is the right way of describing it. If not, I would just like to thank you very much, Paolo, for that lecture. I mean, it was great.
Oh, thanks to you for inviting and for coming.
And to have it all brought together in such a comprehensive way, I think it was really interesting. And and I apologize again that there was we recognized that there was a mistake in the relative timings of the cities.
Yeah.
True. And I did try and correct it with a secondary email, but unfortunately that didn't go out widely. So I did send another email. I have a separate mailing list, which hopefully the correct information was out on that. But we will be sorting that out and not repeating that mistake the next time around. Okay. Anyway, Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you so much for joining us. And I'll just say again, those of you who weren't able to see the whole lecture, the recording will be made available via the RY channel, so you'll be able to watch it again. So thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much. Bye. See you then.